Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the non-applicable clauses, permissible exclusions, exemptions presentation, developing a better understanding of what can and cannot be excused in an audit assessment. My name is Joseph Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone. All of our participants today are on mute, but we definitely want to take your questions, so please make use of the question portion of the dashboard. We will address your questions at the conclusion of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is, will the presentation be made available? The slides will be available for download shortly after we're finished. And if you would like to review this webinar with voiceover, it'll be posted to our YouTube page in a short time as well. Our topics for today, we're going to address what are non-applicable clauses. We're going to review high-level requirements that apply to this issue. We're going to have a discussion on the concept of outsourcing. And also where outsourcing is addressed in the current standard ISO 9001-2015. We're also going to have a historical review of ISO 9001-2008 and how the older standard approached these concepts. We have some commentary on a limited scope, and then finally some concluding remarks and your questions. Now, for our presentation today, we're going to be examining these concepts as they are addressed in 9001-2015. These same concepts appear in several other standards, including AS 9100, IATF 16949, etc. But in those cases, there are going to be sector-specific requirements that apply. So we do offer webinars on those standards, many other standards. I would direct you to our website if you've got questions on exempting a requirement from something other than ISO 9001. So let's begin with what are non-applicable clauses. Now, this verbiage is used primarily in section 4.3 of ISO 9001-2015, where it states that the organization's scope needs to state the types of products and services that are covered and provide justification for any requirement of this international standard that the organization determines not applicable to the scope of its quality management system. Now, clause 4.3 goes on to state that the scope, including any details of these non-applicable clauses, needs to be maintained as documented information. In other words, you have to have this officially stated in some way, shape, or form. Now, as to how this was approached in the 2008 version of ISO 9001, non-applicable clauses, that phraseology, it replaced the older concept of permissible exclusions. Now, permissible exclusions was found in section 1.2 of ISO 9001-2008, and it stated therein that where any requirement of this standard cannot be applied due to the nature of an organization and its product, this can be considered for exclusion. From there, if you referred to section 4.2.2a, it indicated that the organization had to document their exclusions and the related justifications in the context of their quality manual. And of course, the quality manual is no longer a specific requirement under ISO 9001-2015. So for our presentation today, in the interest of just flow, and also the idea that we want to have a single term to refer to these things, I'm going to use the term exemptions as a way to kind of refer to these things all at once. So if you review the 2008 and 2015 versions of ISO 9001, they both essentially say the same thing, when it comes to exemptions. For an exemption to truly be justified, it must be something that is not part of the quality management system as defined by the scope. In other words, it cannot be simply a case of you don't want it subject to audit assessment. If it's present within your quality management system, present within the scope, it has to be included. If it's not, then it can absolutely be exempted. So let's dig a little deeper and get a sense of how we are to better understand that requirement. Now, in terms of high-level requirements that apply, the content of this presentation pulled from a lot of different directions. We have official materials from the TC 176 committee. These are the people that write ISO 9001. We have guidance from the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group. This is a joint task force that represents both the ISO and the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF. We have content within ISO 9001 2015, both auditable content and guidance content. And we've even pulled from the 9002 guidance standard, which was published back in 2016. So we've brought a lot of different content to bear in this presentation. So I'd like to start with some historical items and just to give you some context for where this all started. Now, way back in October of 2008, shortly after the ISO 9001-2008 standard was published, the TC 176 committee issued two officially binding guidance documents. The first of these was called Guidance on ISO 9001 Subclause 1.2. The other, Guidance on Outsourced Processes. These are referred to as documents 524R6 and 630R3. Now, between these two position papers, there was a requirement that came out that many organizations, auditors, and certification bodies found rather controversial. So what was so controversial? Both of these documents taken together provided various permutations pertaining to exemptions, most of which were very easy to understand and agree to. But one of these stood out as confrontational. So first, from guidance document 524R6, examples of situations where conformity to ISO 9001-2008 should not be claimed include where an organization excludes a requirement on the basis that the activity has been outsourced. And then from guidance document 630R3, the intent of clause 4.1 of ISO 9001-2008 is to emphasize that when an organization chooses to outsource, either permanently or temporarily, a process that affects product conformity with requirements, it cannot simply ignore this process, nor exclude it from the quality management system. So in other words, any exemption that is rooted in outsourcing is not an acceptable exemption and should result in a nonconformance during the audit. Now, that guidance was written by the committee that wrote the standard. There simply is no getting around it. Now, the obvious elephant in the room here is design. PJR has had past clients that claimed an exemption from design on the basis that designs were provided by a parent company or a sister company. Now, those exemptions are not appropriate and likely should not have been accepted automatically. We're going to be providing some clarification on that in just a bit. There are two basic justifications for an exemption of design and development. First, if you receive a complete product design from your customers, that's the most obvious justification to exempt design. Or if you do not manufacture products based on a product design, if you operate a warehouse, a distributorship, if it's a service industry that you operate in, and so forth. Now, there is a third option that we're going to be exploring in just a bit, but essentially this harkens back to this idea that to justifiably exempt something, it needs to be something that you're not doing. And outsourcing, as we'll see, represents something that you are responsible for by way of outsourcing. So how can PJR audit something that you don't do? Now, this is a common response that we get from auditors and from clients that express frustration over this requirement. How could you possibly audit design if I don't do design in my building? What you have to remember about this is we're not auditing the actual activity itself. We are auditing the outsourcing controls that are being applied. Now, what is outsourcing, and how do we approach outsourcing as a concept? Again, we want to hearken back to the 9000 standard, and this time we're going to refer to the fundamentals and vocabulary. And we have an official definition for outsourcing. Outsourcing is to make an arrangement where an external organization performs part of the organization's function or process. It's important to note the phrase function or process. That means that the organization still has ownership. It is the organization's function or process, even if it isn't being performed in their facility. And this is further emphasized in the note that appears right after the definition. An external organization is outside of the scope of the management system. However, the outsourced function or process is within the scope. So again, just because it's not being done in your building doesn't mean that you're not responsible for it. And furthermore, it doesn't mean that you can claim it as an exemption. So what are some commonly outsourced processes? Probably the most common outsourced process we see relates to calibration or verification of measurement devices. I would guess that just about everybody on our call today has some measurement devices that they either bring a lab in for or they send out to a lab to have calibrated or verified. That's the most common outsourced activity, but there's a lot of other ones. Outsourced training, outsourcing customer service or order entry, design, as we've indicated, purchasing even. If you have a parent company that provides some aspects of your purchasing activity, that's outsourced. Manufacturing even, if you have a sister company that provides a partially manufactured product, that would be an example of outsourcing. Same with product testing or analysis, even non-conforming product disposal. Lots of different examples of processes that could potentially fall under outsourcing. Now, where was outsourcing discussed in 9001-2008? Again, to kind of draw the lines of connection here. For this, we would look to section 4.1, where an organization chooses to outsource any process that affects product conformity to requirements. The organization shall ensure control over such processes. So this has been part of the picture for quite some time. Now, where is it currently found in the 9001-2015 standard? Well, primarily we would look to section 8.4. I've pulled one good example of what's discussed there. The organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. That comes from section 8.4.1. And there's a clarification for what they mean in section A8. This is, of course, the explanatory annex within ISO 9001. All forms of externally provided products, processes, and services are addressed in 8.4, whether through an arrangement with an associate company or outsourcing processes to an external provider. So they've even written it into the standard itself that they mean parent companies, sister companies, in addition to supplier. That term external provider is intended to be inclusive. It's intended to cover a lot of ground. Now, I did mention that we have some other high-level requirements that we can bring to bear. In the 9002 guidance standard, it discusses this requirement and it states, external providers could include the organization's corporate headquarters, associate companies, suppliers, or someone to whom the organization has outsourced a process. The Auditing Practices Group also weighed in on this. They've issued a guidance document titled Scope of ISO 9001, and they state that outsourcing is to be considered an input to the development of the organization's scope. So anything that you've outsourced is still part of your scope. As a reminder, when we audit an outsourced activity, we are not auditing the actual activity itself. We are rather confirming that appropriate controls have been established. So what do we mean by controls? In general, any methodology of control should be acceptable. Now, I've provided a partial list here. If you have a contract with your external provider, if you've issued a purchase order, if you use email communication to submit requirements, if you have terms and conditions established on your website, if you're doing external provider audits, perhaps you're requiring your external provider to be ISO 9001 certified themselves. Perhaps you are providing them with written work instructions. These are all acceptable forms of control over an outsourced activity. Here's an example. Let's consider a company that chooses to outsource 100% of their calibration or verification activity to a calibration laboratory. So what would our auditor look at? We would look at the contract issued to the calibration laboratory. We would look at the calibration records issued by the calibration laboratory. And we would certainly look at the gauge labeling applied by the calibration laboratory. You'll note that none of these equivocates to a review of the actual calibration or verification activity itself. We're not traveling to the lab. We're not seeing how they do the calibration. We are looking at the controls applied by the organization and the verifications provided by the organization. In this scenario, none of the applicable clauses from ISO 9001-2015 that pertain to calibration or verification would be claimed as an exemption. All of those requirements under 7.1.5 would be considered applicable. One of the things that we do, both on our executive committee review, and we also teach our auditors to do this, is to review the client's website as part of the regular audit process. The organization's website is, of course, considered admissible as audit evidence. And we are looking, we are looking for a couple of key things during that assessment. Number one, does the website appropriately reflect your scope? Does it match up with what we have under contract in terms of what your scope is inclusive of? And secondly, does your website reference design activity? And you have told us that you are not design responsible. So in those instances, when we find out that there is design activity being noted on the website, we reach out to the organization and we seek an explanation. And the explanation falls into one of a few categories. We are told at times corporate provides the designs. Now, we've obviously learned that that's not acceptable. It's acceptable that corporates providing designs. It's not acceptable that the organization be classed as no design. We don't really provide design, we just want to attract potential customers by saying that we do. Now, certainly PJR understands the desire to grow a business, but this is really not acceptable either. Your website and design classification must be aligned with each other. And on rare occasions, we are told that we did design our products, but all products were designed 30 to 40 years ago, or some variation therein. It has come up a few times. In most cases, as long as we can confirm that there is no current design activity, we'll permit such an organization to remain classed as no design. But again, exceptionally rare circumstance. Now, I do want to also spend some time on exemptions rooted in a limited scope. Most of the clients that we have intend for their entire operation to be included in their ISO 9001 certification. We do have a small number of cases where the client wishes to have a limited scope, whether it be for financial reasons or other motivations. It does come up from time to time. Now, where that is the case, it is possible that a portion of ISO 9001 may be considered for exemption that would not have been possible in a full scope situation. So here's an example. Let's say that we have an organization that manufactures clothing for industrial and commercial markets. Now, for our example here, we're going to consider two primary product lines. We'll say that they have leather goods for industrial applications and polyester goods for commercial applications. Now, you may recall that ISO 9001:2015 includes warranty provisions in section 8.5.5. So let's assume that our sample organization here offers warranty returns on their commercial products, but not on their industrial products. If that client was choosing to pursue ISO 9001 for only their industrial product line, it is possible that they would be able to claim a full or partial exemption from section 8.5.5. Now again, we would have to dig into this all properly and verify the validity of that exemption, but it is absolutely possible. So what happens if an inappropriate item is being claimed as an exemption? The most appropriate result of an incorrectly claimed exemption is a nonconformance. Now, we looked a bit earlier at the probable clause numbers to cite in our presentation. Our clients are, now, if we issue a nonconformance and you don't agree that it is valid or warranted, you are absolutely given the right to issue a dispute or even appeal an auditor's decision. That process is discussed in PGR Procedure Pro 10, which is available anytime on our website, www.pjr.com. I'd like to take a second now to introduce a still relatively new concept. Back in mid-2017, we worked on a new certification option for clients who receive some or all of their product designs from a parent or affiliate company. This option came to be referred to as full design outsourced. Now, for a company that is classed as full design outsourced, there are a few things that apply in that circumstance. First of all, the audit time is potentially calculated in the same manner currently used for a company classed as no design. I'm going to be providing a few clarifying comments on that in the next few slides. So in other words, if you had a no design status and you went to a full design outsource status, it is possible that you would see no difference in the audit time. Now, any organization that is classed as full design outsourced is not permitted to exclude any part of the design section of the standard from their quality management system. And the certificate that is issued to such a client has to indicate design as part of the scope, because indeed it is part of the scope by way of outsourcing. Now, when we rolled out our new full design outsourced classification option, we reached out to the ANAB to ensure that we had their concurrence on what we were doing. Now, ANAB generally indicated that they felt our new process was appropriate, but they emphasized that controls still have to be applied to outsourced processes and that those controls have to be included in the audit process itself. So I've provided some summary of the commentary that ANAB gave us at that time. They stated that the complexity, activities, and risks that are present due to an outsourced provider of processes, products, or services need to be controlled and confirmed as discussed in ISO 9001:2015, Section 8.4. And they went on to say that Section 8.4 has many requirements that apply to the organization and must be confirmed or evaluated by the certification body when certifying an organization with outsourced processes, products, or services. In other words, we have to ensure just like everything else in the standard, that the outsourcing control requirements are fully implemented. Now, in terms of audit time, ANAB also indicated that they object to automatic time reductions regarding design status. And they told us that the certification body is required to clearly, effectively, and realistically justify and document justifications for any adjustment in audit time from the established IAF MD5 audit day tables. So in other words, we cannot be expected to initially reduce audit time if you are classified as full design outsourced. What it requires is that our on-site auditor has provided assurance that the controls being applied to the outsourced processes are mature, effective, and can be assessed with no need for added audit time. So with that said, I'm going to run through now our 4 classification options pertaining to design status. We begin with full design. This is obviously any organization that is responsible for the design of at least one of the products that they manufacture. All sections of Clause 8.3 are considered applicable for companies that are classified in this manner. For no design, this has to be an organization that receives all designs from their customers or otherwise does not interact with product designs. This would include warehouses, staffing companies, etc. In these cases, all sections of Clause 8.3 are claimed as not applicable for companies that are classified in this manner. Now, if we have an organization that receives product designs from a parent or affiliate company, but does not have any responsibility for product design, and most importantly, does not advertise or otherwise represent that they are responsible for product design activity, they may, emphasis on may, also qualify for classification as no design. This would obviously be subject to confirmation in the audit process. We also have an option referred to as partial design. This is for an organization that provides technical input, review, verification, or other design services to their clients, but does not typically have responsibility for final design approval. We actually have very few clients that are classified in this manner at this time. Now, a partial design client is going to typically be exempting some, but not all, of the requirements from Section 8.3. And then finally, our newest option, full design outsourced, an organization that receives all or some of its product designs from parent or affiliate companies or subcontractors and advertises or otherwise represents that they are responsible for product design activity. A company with a full design outsourced classification would not exempt any part of Section 8.3. So in conclusion, we want to ensure that our audit process is value added for our clients and address all applicable requirements. Ensuring that exemptions are justified is an important part of this process. I'd like to invite you to tune in to one of our other webinars. We have a brand new webinar called ISO 9001 2015, an introduction to the world's most popular standard. This will be premiering soon. It is a structured introduction to the ISO 9001 2015 standard and provides some insights on many of its key concepts. Another presentation we have is statutory and regulatory requirements, anticipating expectations within a quality management system audit. This is an exploration of S&R requirements and how they impact QMS audits. And we have a variety of webinars on other topics, including Stage 1 auditing, process mapping, and a variety of other standards. The best way for you to keep up with what's going on in the world of certification is to opt in. If you visit our website at www.pjr.com, go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address and click subscribe. You'll be kept informed of the latest news, including new webinars and other relevant information automatically. I do thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard now and see if we have any questions. Okay, so Ana Sanchez Reyes asks, if I perform verification with standard parameters, I can say that I am performing a calibration of equipment. However, we are not an accredited laboratory. Okay. If you're asking this question in the context that would you be exempting a portion of the standard, it sounds like that would not be the case here. And there are no laboratory requirements per se written into ISO 9001-2015. Are there any other questions I can answer today? Kim Reelman asks, what are some of the clause 8.3 clauses that would be audited for a partial design company? I said Riemann, I apologize, Ms. Riemann. The correct way to address a partial design arrangement, there is no perfect way to go about it. There are, and really it depends on the scope of involvement. If you have a situation, for example, where the organization is providing design inputs. Design inputs are discussed in section 8.3.3. If by chance you are providing a review service, you might then discuss review as found under section 8.3.4. Some organizations choose to discuss design changes under 8.3.6 and claim that everything else is not applicable. As long as the explanation is something that you can understand and explain to your auditor, most of the time it will be acceptable. Diana Proctor asks, when does the design of services be applied? So in other words, would we hold you accountable for design of service? It is certainly possible. The standard does include design of products or services. It would depend entirely on whether or not you are designing a service. We would have to look at that in your case in particular, but I can tell you for sure that it is possible. Okay, Charles Tuazolo, I hope I said that right. Parent company wants us to pick up design responsibility for some products. Currently, they do. We used to exempt design. Do we need to continue exempting until we have objective evidence, such as a complete project? Well, Charles, as we've hopefully touched on in our presentation today, if the parent company is providing product designs for a product that you're manufacturing, technically that makes you design responsible, at minimum under full design outsourced. And as far as being certified for full design, if you're taking on full design responsibility, it would not have to wait until you had a complete project. We can definitely audit your implemented controls. Marcelo Dos Marquez asks, are clauses not applicable in sections 6, 7, and 8 only? Right, in the 2008 version it said only chapter 7. Quite right. Technically, you can claim non-applicable for anything in the standard, but it does have to be justified. And once you get outside of section 6, 7, and 8, it is difficult to substantiate an exemption and state that you have implemented an effective quality management system. Fred Wachter asks, if you design a tool to manufacture a part but don't use it to confirm customer design. Fred, I think you're asking, in that circumstance, would you be able to exempt the design requirements in that circumstance? It would depend on what your scope has been written for. If the scope is for the parts that you are manufacturing and the tool is not considered part of the scope and it's not a sellable product, then potentially you would still be able to claim no design for your quality management system. Good questions today. Anything further? Okay, we have a question from Douglas Toynton. Research and development are outsourced, but internal controls for design are in place for design once the project is approved. Is there any reason to audit external controls for development prior to design? Okay, Douglas, I think I'm understanding where you're coming from. So you have an external R&D wing within your company that's working on new product development. Once there is an approved product, that it would go through the more standard design process, which is controlled locally. We would certainly expect our auditors to look at the interface with the R&D department, but in terms of an exemption, however you look at it, the correct classification in your case sounds like full design. Any further questions? Okay, thank you all for your time. Have a great day.